Can you beat Starcraft 2 Wings of Liberty with a DDR pad? Yeah, probably. Let's get right into it. First of all, I'm doing this campaign on normal. This means the game speed automatically starts at normal, however I quickly changed that because it feels like crawling through molasses. Also, I'll leave these first two missions much more unedited so you can get a feel for what I'm going through. After these first two missions, it'll mostly be the highlights, since I'm sure you'll want to tear your hair out if you hear me say I'm struggling to make supply depots for the 17th time. Now, you're probably wondering how I'm even using a DDR pad to control Starcraft in the first place. I'm using another program that lets any controller control your mouse and keyboard. With that, I get 10 buttons to play Starcraft with. The first and most important thing I bound was mouse movement. I made the 4 main arrow keys, up, down, left, and right, move my mouse in that direction. The next thing I needed to be able to do was click, so I assigned up left to left click and up right to right click. Now with mouse controls sorted, I have 4 buttons left to actually play Starcraft with. The first key I need is Shift, which I bound to the Start button. Shift is very important for setting up production hotkeys and just general use. However, I don't need to press it that much, so I put it somewhere out of the way. Unfortunately, another button I need is F2, which is the hotkey for Select All Army. I bound this to Select since it's not a button I need to access very often. I say unfortunately because I don't want to use F2. Its main problem is that it makes it really hard to have different groups of units since they will all clump together every time you press it. But F2 is by far the easiest way to select my army with a DDR pad, so I have to use it. The next 2 buttons I want to be frequently used hotkeys. The most important button I can think of that I want hotkeyed is Attack Move. And since I'm using grid hotkeys, more on that later, I bound the down right arrow to T. And for the last button, I set the down left arrow to Q. I picked Q because I thought it was the most important grid hotkey since it could make both Marines and SCVs. With that out of the way, now it's time to talk a bit about this mission. Liberation Day is a really easy mission where all you have to do is use your starting Marines, and if you get halfway through, an attack move with them. This makes it the perfect mission to learn how to control units with the DDR pad. Overall, it's actually pretty easy. The hardest part is selecting units. For selecting units, I have a few options. First, I can box select them, or I can select them from a control group I've made. The problem is that both of these methods are hard and slow to actually do. Even in an easy and slow mission like this, I found that F2 was my best option. The biggest problem with control is the camera. My only way to move the camera is by moving my mouse to the edges of the screen, which takes a while and is kind of annoying, but I get used to it. Anyway, that's Liberation Day. Now it's time for the Outlaws. The Outlaws is the first macro mission of this run, and the objective is pretty simple. All you have to do is destroy the small Dominion base. Immediately, I encounter the first problem in almost every mission. Your SCVs don't start mining. This means I have to figure out what the fastest way to get my SCVs mining is. Initially, I start by box selecting them, but at some point I figure out it's faster to double-click on an SCV to select all of them and tell them to mine. Now for the next problem, supply depots. The first problem is just selecting the supply depots. I have to slowly go through 2 menus just to start building any. The big problem comes after, which is trying to build multiple supply depots. Most of the time you don't want to just build one supply depot, you'd rather queue multiple. Which is kind of a problem with where my shift key is. But unfortunately I just don't have a better place to put it. Once I unlock instant depots, the shift problem will be alleviated entirely. Refineries are actually pretty easy to build. If you're even vaguely close to a gas geyser and are selecting a refinery, usually it'll automatically snap to it, making them really easy to build. One more minor thing to note. Once my SCVs are done building something, I usually won't order them back to mining. They're kinda hard to select, and it's also hard to actually select minerals to mine, so it's usually more of a hassle than it's worth. And now for unit production. You might not think it, but control groups are actually very important for using a DDR pad effectively. While there's an easy way to select units with F2, there's not a very easy way to select all of your buildings. So I have to make one. If you didn't know, there's actually a setting you can use to make your control groups be left and right clickable to quickly assign units to them. The control groups themselves are kind of small and hard to click, but it's much easier than trying to select each building individually. Since it's annoying to start building units, I tend to overbuild my production and queue up a lot of units at a time. It's certainly not the best way to play Starcraft, but I'm using a DDR pad. I think that went out the window a long time ago. One last note on producing units, I can only ever have one of them hotkeyed at a time. This means it's really easy to make Marines, but if I want to make something else, it's much more of a hassle. If I want to make something that's not a Marine, like a medic, I have to manually move my mouse over rather than just hitting a button. This is another reason to overbuild production structures. The less of that I have to do, the better. The mission itself is pretty easy. I just make a large group of Marines and go rescue the rebels, and that's basically enough to clear the base on its own. Not even the Bunker of Death can stop me. Since there's no siege tank on normal, all I have to do is attack move and I pretty much win. I do try to do a little bit of stutter stepping to see if it's something that's worth it, and it's not. The AI is good enough in Starcraft 2, so I'll just let them sort it out. I finish off the base, and now it's time for 0 hour. Surely 0 hour will be a challenge, right? I'm using a DDR pad. There's no way this could possibly be a waste of 20 minutes. It is still a waste of 20 minutes. There's no saving 0 hour, I guess. Okay, but seriously, I just fill the bunkers and make more Marines for the rest of the mission. I don't even grab the bonuses. They don't give you money or research. There's really no point. 20 minutes later, and we're on to smash and grab. For the rest of the missions, I've added in what upgrades I got. There's a lot of them, so I'll only talk about the important ones. This is still an early mission, so just making Marines with some Marauders and Medics mixed in is more than enough. Smash and Grab is a really good mission at making you feel like you're on a tight time limit, but you're really not. Even on Brutal, you've got about 20 minutes before the Zerg claim the artifact, so you're not in that much of a rush. So I am taking my time on this mission. I get the bonus to the left of your base the normal way, rather than trying to get it with the floating command center cheese, because I'm using a DDR pad and that seems way too much effort. The only difficulty I had this mission was being caught off guard by a Zerg attack wave. I didn't want to send my entire army back to deal with it, so I just queued up some units and hoped that would be enough. Turns out it was, but barely. The Protoss base doesn't put up too much of a fight, and neither do the Stone Zealots. And with that, we're off to the evacuation. I unlock fire bats in this mission, but unfortunately they're pretty bad, so you'll never see them again. The goal for this mission is to protect a truck as it travels up the road towards the starport. It certainly sounds like this would be annoying for this challenge, having to move your units constantly, but it turns out it's pretty easy because you can just right-click on the truck and your units will just follow it. This mission is also really easy, to the point where I think it's harder to grab the Zerg research than it is to defend the trucks. Okay, that's probably an exaggeration, but I just made the standard Marines, Marauders, and Medics, and this mission was basically over. But after this, we move on to the Devil's Playground, which is actually a pretty hard mission in this challenge. The Devil's Playground is a really interesting mission. The goal is to mine 8,000 minerals while lava rises periodically. What you're supposed to do is move your SCVs to high ground and float your buildings like command centers. This is doable, but I want a strategy where I have to micro my command center and SCVs as little as possible. Fortunately, mining is not the only way to get money on this mission. There are a lot of minerals scattered throughout the map, and every Zerg base you kill gives you a lot of money. Even playing normally, I prioritize killing the Zerg bases and collecting the money around the map because it's so much faster. But here, it's easier. The unit unlock for this mission is Reapers. They're decent here thanks to their cliff jumping ability, and they will really shine next mission. I start by rescuing the extra command center and SCVs at the top of the map. However, I decide it's probably best to leave them there because having to micromanage 2 command centers sounds like it'd be far too much. Then, after taking time to build up more units, I kill the Brutalisk. Normally you can do this with just Reapers, but that requires a lot of micro, so I can't exactly do that. Turns out the Brutalisk on normal is pretty easy. By the Brutalisk is where I put my command center for the rest of the mission. I decide it's easier to long distance mine from the 3 surrounding mineral patches than it is to keep moving the command center around. After that, it's just a matter of attacking the Zerg bases, which isn't too hard. I should have left a bunker with Marines at home, because a small Zerg attack wave almost kills my barracks, but it's nothing some warpigs can't clean up. Overall, this mission didn't put up too much of a challenge. Now, time for Outbreak. The main goal of this mission is to destroy the infested structures during the day and defend from the infested at night. Overall, this mission plays about normally, just a lot slower. Normally, Reapers are good enough to go out at night and clear buildings, but I opt not to just to be safe. But why are Reapers so good for this mission? First, Reapers have an anti-structure attack that tears through buildings faster than any other option. They're also great defensively, especially if you get their range upgrade. They'll absolutely tear through the infested. I'm able to clear most of the top and right sides of the map during the first day. I managed to snipe one of the infestors right at the end, too. On day 2, I kill the rest of the right side of the map and the entire bottom, and make sure to get the last infestor there too for all of the research. And one last day is all I need to clear out the rest of the infested and move on to Belshir. The goal of this mission is to get 7 of these Terrazine altars before the Tal'Darim seal them off. Welcome to the Jungle is usually a major difficulty spike once you get to it. That's still true here, just less so. The difficulty comes from the speed at which they try to capture the altars and their access to high-tech Protoss units early on in the campaign. However, since this run is done on normal, the Tal'Darim are both slower and don't have access to some of their scarier options like Storm. Which is a good thing, because I don't know how I would manage to dodge Storm with a DDR pad. This mission plays pretty normally. I mass Marines, Medics, and Marauders to quickly stop the Tal'Darim from capturing any altars, but I take my time capturing them myself. Unfortunately, Goliaths would be more durable if they were made out of paper, so you won't be seeing them except for their mercenary counterpart this run. Another trick to make this mission easier is to ignore the 2 rightmost altars. They're pretty far removed from the rest of them, so they're not really worth going out of your way to defend. I make sure to grab both of the bonuses before I grab the last of the Terrazine I need. Overall, this mission wasn't too bad, but that's mostly because I was playing on normal. I imagine if this were done on hard or brutal, this mission would be a lot worse. With that, now it's siege tank time. The Dig is our introduction to siege tanks, and they are incredible. Siege tanks can be a bit of a hassle to set up, but it is well worth it, and they will be a staple of our defenses in every mission from here on out. This mission is fairly normal, but there is one change I make. Normally you move your siege tanks between sides as the Protoss attack, but that's too much work for me. Instead, I mass all of my siege tanks in the center by the drill, hoping the fire draws the enemy attack waves into the siege tanks rather than the buildings. This works mostly well, and I only lose 1 depot. For the bonus objectives, I use my starting troops as well as a couple mercenaries to clear the small groups of Protoss guarding them. The big problem here is the air attack waves. I don't have the time or ability to set up any extra air defenses before the attack waves arrive. So instead, I use a tried and true strategy. Target all the air units with a laser drill and hope I don't die. Fortunately, I don't. 30 minutes and a jump scare from Zeratul later, and we're on to the Protoss missions. Whispers of Doom is the hardest Protoss mission, and it's not even close. This mission is a no-build mission focused around microing Zeratul and a bunch of stalkers you find along the way. Needless to say, I'm going to have some difficulties with this. However, there is one thing I have to help me: better hotkeys. Initially, I was using grid hotkeys, meaning each unit and structure shared the same grid of hotkeys. I started this way because I thought it would be the best way to bind one button to do as many actions as possible. However, I discovered a better way. The problem with the grid is that I can't change where units are on the grid. For example, I only had a button to easily build Marines on the barracks, and if I wanted to change that to Medics, I had no option to do so. So instead, I reverted to normal hotkeys, but I changed everything I needed to Q. This gives me much more choice in what I want hotkeyed. The most important part about this is that I can now use units' abilities without having to manually hit the button. This makes it possible to use Zeratul and the Stalker's Blink ability, and it will greatly help with anything else that has an ability, such as Stimpack on my Marines. My biggest problem in this mission is how hard it is to use Void Prison. If I have as much time as I need to pick a target, like with the Spore Crawler, it's pretty easy. However, if I'm under any kind of time pressure, like trying to void prison this Ultralisk, it's really hard, and I'm often better off not trying at all. There are a lot of parts in this mission like this that are just slower and more tedious, but not necessarily hard. I have as much time as I need to line up a void prison and blink, so it's not hard, it just takes forever. Getting to the first shrine isn't too bad, since I have as much time as I need to line up all of my void prisons. Alternatively, I could blink past most of it, but I decide to play it safe and take my time. After the first shrine is when we get our first set of stalkers. They'll periodically replenish themselves throughout the mission, so if they die it's not too big of a deal. They will, however, mostly be on their own. I'm usually too busy desperately microing Zeratul trying to stun something to use them effectively, so they'll mostly just be attack moving. Since I have such poor control of my units, sections like this, where you're supposed to slowly pull apart the enemy, often devolve to me just attack moving, hoping I can brute force it without taking too much damage. Sections with broodlords were always a mess, so somehow it's not that much worse on a DDR pad. The only challenge here is that the broodlord would be dead by the time I void prison it, so I have to manage without it. This section, where you have to defend from a bunch of air units, isn't too bad. On normal, there's no Ultralisk, so Zeratul is free to kill a couple of roaches that spawn. And there's not really enough Mutalisks to pose a problem anyway. For the first bonus objective, since I'm on normal, there aren't that many units, so I can pretty much just attack move it and be fine. For the Baneling section, after the second shrine, I use the tried and true strategy of just face tanking them and hope I don't die. Since I'm on normal, this works well enough. While I'm over here, Zeratul takes care of the second bonus objective. After this is the section with High Templar Karas. My goal here is to get the Stalkers onto the high ground and hope they target the air units. If they don't, I don't really have a way of getting them to, though. Fortunately, Niduses are a lot bigger, so it's very easy to get the Stalkers to target them down. I cheesed the final hatchery by attacking it with Stalkers from the low ground. After that, it's time for the hardest part, the escape section. Here, we have to escape to the Void Seeker before the Zerg overrun us. Good use of blinks is the only thing that's going to make this possible. I use my first blink to avoid the first set of rocks. Then I blink past the next rocks and wait for my blink to recharge to skip over the final set. I wait for blink rather than destroying the rocks myself because it buys me more time. Somehow I managed the escape sequence on my first try, and with that it's off to go kill a hybrid. A sinister turn has us macroing with Protoss instead of Terran this time. It's not that much different since you don't even have access to Warp Gate on this mission, but even if I did, it's easier to build out gateways. Also, it's way easier to get supply with Protoss, since probes can build a pylon and move on to the next one. They don't have to stick around and build it, so it's way easier to chain a bunch of pylons together. This mission single-handedly convinced me to take the instant depots instead of extra gas on the Protoss tech tree. As for the mission itself, it's fairly easy. The main problem to deal with is that the hybrid Mar will constantly attack you. He gets stronger each time he does, but by no means does this put you on any sort of time limit. Really, the only difficult Mar encounters are the first couple, since you don't have a large mass of Immortals built up yet. All I need to do is make a bunch of Immortals and Stalkers, and the mission is basically over. I do get the ability to make High Templar in this mission. Normally they're pretty good since they can feedback Mar and shut down most of his abilities, but it's just not needed here, so I'm not gonna bother. Also, it turns out you don't even need Stalkers. Normally on Brutal, there's a lot of enemy air units in the base at the end, so you need a lot of Stalkers to deal with them, but on Normal, there's just one warp prism. You can just make Immortals. Echoes of the Future is just easy. Instead of dealing with a hybrid, you're dealing with a small Zerg attack wave on a visible timer that attacks less often than the hybrid does. Yeah, this one's just free. I can't do the speedrun strat where you blink around really well with Zeratul since I don't have enough control, but instead I just make a few Colossi and some Stalkers, and I win. I wish I had anything else to say, but I just don't. I guess what I can say is I'm not doing in Utter Darkness. I don't need the research, the mission's really boring, and I don't want to sit there for 30 minutes just to prove that Colossi and Void Rays are good units, so I'm skipping it. That's the Protoss missions done. Now we get to go back to the magical land of siege tanks. I get a lot of research from those Protoss missions, which gives me some very important upgrades, the most important of which being orbital depots, which lets me build depots way faster and easier than before. Also, I get automated refineries, which means I don't have to worry about getting SCVs to harvest gas, I just have to build it once. Anyway, the goal for this mission is to destroy 8 trains as they're trying to escape. Since I'm playing on normal, I am allowed to miss 2. I was kinda worried about this mission, which is why I delayed it for so long. I waited until I had siege tanks, because siege tanks make this mission absolutely free. The strategy here is to fill the left side of my base with siege tanks. They hit both the top and middle tracks, and that's where most of the trains come from. With this, I only have to deal with 2 trains on the bottom. I decide to let the first 2 trains go to give me as much time as possible to build up my siege tank count. This does mean that the first train I have to destroy is on the bottom, however this is actually very helpful. Since I haven't destroyed any trains yet, this one is still unguarded. My siege tanks obliterate the top and middle trains and the Marauder kill team. This means the only thing I have to worry about is building up enough forces for the one bottom train I have to destroy. For the bottom train, I mostly use mercenaries and my normal bio ball. It's more than enough, especially since I'm on normal, meaning there's no defenders. Well, that was fun. Now it's time to go unlock ghosts. Unfortunately, I need ghosts, which means I have to do Ghost of a Chance instead of Breakout. This is a slow, no-build mission broken up into 3 parts. Part 1 can be completed by just attack moving with your units, so I'm moving on to Part 2. Section 2 is a bit more interesting. The start is made much harder since I struggle to use Nova's mind control effectively, which makes clearing the landing zone much more annoying. After that, the rest of this section is just using Reaper's cliff jumping ability effectively and then slowly pushing with siege tanks. Why does everybody tell you they're launching a nuke before they do it? I finish this section by stealing a nuke, and since I don't give them a 5-minute heads up, mine's much more effective. Section 3 gives you a bunch of air units to use, but honestly I've never been able to use them very effectively. Here I use them to clear a small group of units so I can get to some bigger targets to mind control. First an Ultralisk, and then a Thor. Between those two, all that's left is the final base, which I once again steal a nuke for. That's Ghost of a Chance done. I decide to also do Breakout because I really like this mission. This mission is much harder with the DDR pad because your abilities are much harder to use, most importantly, consumption. Right away, we're also introduced to how hard it is to use Mind Blast effectively. Fortunately, the shield is really easy to use, so my plan for most problems going forward is to face tank it with the shield. The first base goes down as normal and I unlock Consumption. Consumption is Tosh's most important ability since it gives him back energy, but it is so hard to use. As you can see, it's almost impossible to use it on a target that's moving. For the cell blocks, I find that my best bet is to dive in with the shield and hope it goes somewhat okay. Miraculously, I don't die on this first one. I even managed to not die again when Tosh decides he wants to step into detection. I deal with the second base about how you normally would, but it's a lot slower. First, I don't get to stun the Raven, so it manages to fly away. And then after that, I have to rely a lot more on Raynor's forces, since I can't stun the missile turret in the bunker. But with enough patience, the second base goes down. The second cell block is pretty easy. I just use my shield and focus on the Raven, since it's the only thing that can see me. I die multiple times when attacking the final base. The first time, I just get way too greedy trying to take out a missile turret. The second time I die is because I misclick sending Tosh up the main ramp instead of the side ramp to go nuke the production facilities. On the last try, I'm able to finish the mission how I normally do. I use 2 nukes on each set of production facilities so they stop building more units and are forced to pull defenders to attack. Since I'm playing on normal, I also get a 5th nuke, but I just end up wasting it because I didn't really need it. That's Breakout done. Now it's time to go to Haven. I chose to do Haven's Fall because Protoss research is so much more useful than Zerg research. You unlock Vikings on this mission, but they're not actually very good here. There are some broodlords on this mission, which makes Vikings good, but there's not enough to force you to need Vikings, and most of the bases have a lot of anti-air defenses anyway, which makes Vikings hard to keep alive. So instead, you're never gonna guess what units I used. I start by making siege tanks and bunkers to defend my base. It's worth noting I'm taking my time on this mission because I don't care if the extra settlements get infested or not. It's really hard to stop all of the attack waves, so I just let them get infested and I'll deal with them later. I mostly just use Marines for clearing. They're good enough versus the infested, and they can hit Mutalisks and Broodlords. They are even better since I finally figured out how to use Stimpack with my hotkeys. I do accidentally stop one infestation wave, though. Turns out, on normal at least, that Haven's Fall is really easy if you just take your time. With that done, now it's on to Cutthroat. Cutthroat plays pretty much normally. The goal of this mission is to get 8,000 minerals to hire Mira's mercenaries so you can go kill Orlan's base. You don't have to hire Mira's mercenaries, but it's easier here, so I do. My goal here is what I normally do. I try to make an army big enough to take out Orlan's bases and defend myself, but not too big so that I'm not wasting too many minerals. Defensively, I just make a couple siege tanks, and that's more than enough. And offensively, a standard bio ball is more than enough. Destroying the bases gives you a lot of money in this mission. Then you can use your army to gather the scrap you need to hire Mira's mercenaries. This is more tedious of a process with the DDR pad, but it's still not hard. On normal, Mira's mercenaries can clear the base by themselves, so I just F2A move and I win. With that done, now I decide to go to the Mobius factor. The goal for this mission is to destroy 3 data cores before Kerrigan gets to them. Normally what you're supposed to do is use the medevacs you unlock in this mission to ferry your troops around so you can avoid the Zerg on the ground. However, controlling medevacs with a DDR pad is probably the worst possible thing I can do in Starcraft, so I'm gonna pick something else. What if your units were the medevacs? So yeah, I make Vikings. I make lots of Vikings. Vikings fly and can drop down to clear the data cores, and they're approximately 5 orders of magnitude easier to control than medevacs. Unfortunately, this means I have to strand any troops I rescue, but their situation's no worse than when I got to them, so it's fine. After the first data core, I take time to amass a larger army of Vikings and support them with some science vessels for free repairs. Overall, maneuvering an army of Vikings is still clunky, but it's much better than it would be with medevacs. Biggest problem I have to deal with are things like spore crawlers. I can't easily keep some Vikings in the air and some Vikings on the ground, so spore crawlers become a pain to deal with. Fortunately, Vikings are Starcraft 2 units, meaning they clear bases really fast. I even get the Brutalisk bonus objective, and it dies really fast. Also, why is a Brutalisk just on an island here? What happened to it? How did it get here? I doom dropped the last data core, and that's Mobius factored on. Honestly, I'll probably use Vikings any other time I play this mission. The hardest part of Engine of Destruction is the opening bit where you have to babysit Tychus. But if you take the time to wait and heal your units, it's not too bad. Once Tychus steals the Odin, every enemy unit on the ground in this mission is now invalidated. Now, the only threat you have to deal with are air units, such as these battle cruisers. The game gives you a few wraiths and suggests, hey, you should build a lot more of these. But do you know what's cheaper, builds faster, has more range, does more damage, and doesn't need a tech lab? Vikings! Okay, but seriously, Vikings are just so much better than wraiths. Yeah, sure, Vikings have to drop to the ground to deal their damage, but it's not like the Wraith's laser was doing anything anyway. And it's not like the cloak helps much either. Since I don't want to take the time to manually move my army with the Odin, I discovered a fun trick to make them do that automatically. If you rally your production structures to the Odin, they will always follow it, no input from you required. You're probably thinking I could just right-click the Odin with the units and make them follow it. However, I found that when the Odin stops after clearing the base, oftentimes my units will stop too and won't automatically follow it again. For some reason, this didn't happen when I rallied via the production structures. Unfortunately, SCVs didn't seem to behave the same way, probably due to something with their repairing, so I have to manually move them around, but that's a lot better than moving the entire army with the Odin. The Odin is strong enough that all I have to do is build Vikings for this mission. I even go out of my way to kill the Loki. It's the strongest enemy on this map, requiring a whopping 2 volleys from my Vikings to destroy it. The last base is a joke too with this many Vikings. Even battle cruisers go down in 1 volley. That's Engine of Destruction done. Now it's time for Media Blitz. Media Blitz lets you control the Odin, so I'd say it's easier than Engine of Destruction. I'm not even gonna have to make Vikings this mission. Media Blitz starts with a sneak attack, so I use this opportunity to take out the airbase. With the airbase gone, the Odin will destroy anything the other 2 bases send. I do almost lose the Odin in the sneak attack, but fortunately 71 health is more than 0. The unit I unlock in this mission is the Thor. The Thor is a really good unit for this challenge. It's big, bulky, and expensive, and requires no micro, so it's easy to build and use. So after setting up some basic base defenses, I just make a bunch of Thors. Since I've already taken out the air base, I don't have to worry about air units, which is their one main weakness. I don't unlock the secret mission because piercing the shroud on a DDR pad sounds like torture, and I don't need the research anyway, so I'm just not gonna bother. Between the Odin and the Thors, there's nothing the enemy can do to stop me from capturing the broadcast towers. Not even the airbase tower puts up a fight, as their most common enemy are Reapers. And Reapers don't exactly counter Thors or the Odin. Media Blitz was pretty easy, now it's time for Supernova, which is actually a challenge. The first thing I do on Supernova is wait. While I'm waiting here, the timer for the mercenaries is actually progressing. This means I'll be able to buy them as soon as the mission actually starts. And for my plan, this is very important. The main gimmick of Supernova is that a wall of fire is rapidly approaching your base. What you're supposed to do is clear out Protoss bases and move your structures there. However, this is really difficult with a DDR pad, so I came up with a new strategy. I only move my base once to the right of where I spawn, and I only do this to get more minerals since your starting patches are very small. My plan now is to build up as big of an army as I can get before the firewall destroys my base and then cut through the top. The base in the middle is too annoying to deal with, which is why I decide I should go around. I do lose out on 1 research doing this, but I don't need it for anything, so it's fine. On my first attempt, I didn't spend long enough building up, so I'm able to get through the enemy's first base, but by the time I get to their main base, I run out of steam. On my second attempt, I spent much more time building up an army before I attack the Protoss base. This time, it goes much smoother. I'm able to get through the first base much faster, and I don't lose as many forces, so I can get to the main base just fine. I have to float my command center to save myself from a Colossus. Just after that, I finish the mission, and now it's off to Maw of the Void to unlock battle cruisers. For Maw of the Void, I make battle cruisers. And then after I make battle cruisers, I make more battle cruisers. This mission plays it exactly like it normally does. You just make battle cruisers, attack, move, and win. I guess it's worth noting I decided to not cheese the mission with nukes, but it's Maw of the Void. You make battle cruisers. That's it. Fortunately, Char is much more interesting than this. Gates of Hell has 2 objectives. First, get 100 supply, and then kill the 3 Nidus worms by Warfield's crashed battlecruiser. To help with the 100 supply, rescuable drop pods drop throughout the map. However, if they're even slightly inconvenient, I'm not gonna get them. I found it was way easier to just stay at home and make 100 supply and wait for Warfield to crash down. Now that Warfield has crashed down, you're supposed to fight your way through the whole Zerg base to destroy those 3 Nidus worms, but that sounds like a lot of effort. So instead I drop a Marauder on this cliff right here. For some reason, the Zerg will never send an Overlord or Overseer to get vision of the Marauder, so he's free to kill these 2 Nidus worms. You can do something similar for the last Nidus worm too, but I forgot where exactly to put the units. So instead of looking it up, I just start making an army next to Warfield. While I amass an army to deal with the last Nidus worm, I'm going to talk about what mission I'm going to do next. After Gates of Hell, you get to choose to do either Shatter the Sky or Belly of the Beast. Which mission you do changes what threat you face on All In. Normally, I'll do Shatter the Sky because dealing with Nidus worms on All In is much easier than dealing with air units. However, I don't know that it is physically possible for me to deal with Nidus worms on All In. Normally, to deal with them, you just cloak Banshees and fly them around, but I don't think I have the time or control to be able to do that effectively. So instead, I think I have to do Belly of the Beast to do all-in air and deal with air units instead. I believe this to be possible over all-in ground, but it certainly won't be easy. However, that means I have to do Belly of the Beast, which is... oh boy. You know what's worse than a no-build hero mission? A no-build hero mission with 4 heroes. This is the mission I struggled with the most by far. The first of many struggles makes itself apparent immediately. I can't line up Rainer's piercing shot very well. If I'm in the middle of combat, the best hope I have is to point in the general direction of the enemies and hope I hit. Tychus's grenades require a lot less precision, but since I have to manually select Tychus to be able to use them, I just can't, unfortunately. This means I'm playing the mission down one ability that I'm supposed to have. Fortunately, the heroes are decent on their own, and Stetman's healing lets them tank, so it's not the end of the world that I have poor ability usage, but it will be a consistent problem. Fortunately, there is a savior for this mission, Flamin' Betty. Betty is the only thing that's going to make this mission possible. It's a really powerful flamethrower turret that I'll set up before each engagement. Not only does it do a lot of damage, but it also draws aggro, keeping my heroes safer. I make sure to rescue the extra units, but they're a liability until the charge section, so I leave them there. I'm able to make it to the first charge without too much difficulty, but every fight's still a struggle. Normally, these Nidus Worms are pretty easy. You just shoot 2 of them with Rainer and use Tychus's grenades on the other 2. However, I can't get to Tychus's grenade, so I have to wait for Rainer's cooldown to snipe the other Nidus Worms. This is a consistent problem throughout the mission. The first charge isn't too difficult if you put Betty in the right spot. You want to put it north in between the 2 highlighted positions so it covers both entrances. For the rest of the charge, all I have to do is use my ability as well to destroy Nidus Worms as they spawn. It can get a little hectic, but Betty is good enough to hold on its own. And now it's time for the second section. For this section, I have to wait for Betty for every group of enemies, otherwise I will very easily be overwhelmed. And even with Betty, I almost get overwhelmed anyway, since I can't use Tychus's grenades. Another problem, since I'm using F2, my medics will always come with me, and I don't have an easy way to keep them at the back. You're probably wondering why it's a bad thing to have medics. The problem is that Stetman and medics can't heal the same target at the same time, and Stetman heals so much faster. He heals so much faster that if a medic starts healing a unit, they're almost always going to die. The best thing I can do to mitigate this is try to periodically send the medics back to the start of the map. It's not foolproof, but it's better than nothing. It's a struggle, but I managed to rescue the fire bats on this level. Unlike before, I'm taking them with me since I'll need all the firepower I can get for the Nidus Worm section. This Nidus section is really slow. Since I don't have Tychus's grenade, it is really hard to make any kind of forward progress. But I'm not getting overwhelmed, so I can take all the time I need. Oh god, I'm getting overwhelmed. I don't manage to place Betty in time, so I unfortunately take a lot of losses here. The second charge is harder, but has a similar idea to the first. I put Betty in a spot where it covers multiple angles, and here I hope it tanks Banelings for me too. Unfortunately, just Betty and piercing shot isn't enough. I lose all my extra units except for 2 Marines, and I'm almost completely overrun. The last section is pretty similar. I have to be patient and wait for Betty, since I can't use Tychus to pop eggs, I have to deal with a lot more units than you normally do. But if I'm patient and wait for Betty, it isn't too bad. Unfortunately, I can't get Betty into the right spot to handle the Omegalisk, so it kills all of the Marines. Time for the Queen boss fight, and I was initially very worried. Since I lost all of my Marines, I thought I would get overwhelmed by all the adds of the Queen spawns. However, and I think this might be a normal difficulty thing, the Queen stops popping eggs pretty fast, and then I have enough damage to deal with her before she downs a hero. This holds true for each time the Queen pops up. I don't even need to have Flamin' Betty down to help. It gets dicey at the end as I do get overwhelmed, but fortunately I landed a piercing shot and killed the Queen just before she killed me. Now for the escape. This is the only time I have ever struggled with this part, and my god, what a struggle it was. Since it takes so long for me to be able to move my units, I need to plan out an efficient path and where to use my abilities. The first try I get overwhelmed since I can't go fast enough. Also in this section, if your hero falls down, they actually just die. No getting back up for them. Well, unless you count a reload. The second try goes much better. I managed to get everything but Stepman to the flare since I didn't click far enough into it. Instead of stepping on the flare, Stepman decides it's time for a lava bath. Anyway, third try's the charm, and it's time for all in. All in. This is the mission I've been planning for this entire time. The objective is simple. Artifact. 30 minutes, defend it. Fortunately, the artifact is able to help you in this mission. Every 3 minutes, you can activate its energy nova, clearing out all of the Zerg around it. The artifact is incredibly powerful, and it makes this mission a lot easier if you use it well. But for this circumstance, I'm using it as a panic button. If one of my sides gets broken, that's the only thing I can do to respond fast enough to not die. This mission is the reason I needed ghosts. The biggest reoccurring problem in this mission are Brood Lords. Brood Lords are a Zerg siege unit that outrange almost everything you have. There are 2 ways to deal with Brood Lords. First is to manually use Vikings, which takes a lot of effort and attention, and I can't really do, so I need a different passive solution. That's why I picked Ghosts. Between the Ghost range upgrade and the Bunker range upgrade, Ghosts and Bunkers are able to outrange Brood Lords and passively deal with them. It's not a perfect system, and occasionally I'll have to send a couple Vikings to deal with a rogue Broodlord, but it's good enough. This is all in air, but there are still ground attack waves I have to deal with. I put a couple planetaries and siege tanks at each side. This is enough to deal with the ground waves. The next thing to deal with are the air attack waves. Frequently throughout the mission, Matt will inform you that there's a large group of Zerg flyers heading straight for the artifact. These attack waves consist of mostly Mutalisks and sometimes Broodlords. You start this mission with 3 battlecruisers and a couple of missile turrets, which are nice, but I need to make a lot more Vikings. Unfortunately, I'm usually far too busy with other things to try to micro them well, so I just mostly move them towards the artifact and hope they do well. The last major threat is Kerrigan. Kerrigan attacks your base 5 times and gets progressively stronger each time. Kerrigan has a lot of mechanics. First, she has a shield that reduces all incoming damage to 6. This means things like siege tanks are a lot less effective. Her main attack also does a lot of damage, ripping through planetaries pretty quickly if you don't have multiple SCVs repairing. And if that wasn't enough, she also has an implosion ability that instantly kills any high-value target like siege tanks or battlecruisers. So usually how I deal with Kerrigan is with Marines. They do low damage but very quickly, so they quickly tear through her shield, and they aren't high-value targets, so they won't get imploded. This works great. The first 2 times, Kerrigan shows up. On the 3rd attack, Kerrigan learns Razor Swarm. Razor Swarm is Storm on steroids. Even playing normally, my Marines struggle to stay alive, so they're not going to be a good option here. So I need something that won't get imploded, won't die to Razor Swarm, and isn't Marines. What's even left? Well, the only viable unit I have left are Ghosts. Normally, Ghosts are pretty good versus Kerrigan, thanks to their snipe ability. If you have enough Ghosts sniping Kerrigan, she'll die before she inflicts too much damage, and Ghosts don't easily die to Razor Swarm. But as you probably imagined, I can't really use Snipe, it's just so hard to target. This means I have to rely on Ghost's basic attack. It's good enough, I guess. Oh yeah, the Leviathan also exists. 2/3 of the way through the mission, the Leviathan shows up. It sits away from the artifact and spawns a lot of Mutalisks and I think some Broodlords. Ideally, you're able to kill it and stop those spawns, but I just can't. I just don't have the unit count to kill it. All my resources have to be dedicated to defending Kerrigan. And it's not like a few Mutalisks is something I can't deal with anyway. So it'll just sit here for the rest of the mission. Anyway, back to Kerrigan. Eventually, I make a few extra barracks and have them just make Marines, in the hopes that they'll at least do something to Kerrigan before they die. This works about as well as you would expect. I am able to kill Kerrigan, but she wipes out almost all of my Ghosts. And between Ghosts for Kerrigan and Vikings for the air units, I am starved of gas by this point, and I've started hemorrhaging units. The one good thing I have going for me is that was basically the last Kerrigan attack I have to deal with. She will spawn one more time, but it's so close to the end of the mission that all I have to do is survive. I don't have to be able to kill her. At this point, I'm starting to break on all sides. The flyers start overwhelming the artifact itself, but fortunately Marines can shoot up so they can solve that problem. Kerrigan shows up one last time and the mission's almost over. Now I can use the tried and true strategy of spamming everything in the mercenary compound and hoping it's enough. I managed to take down Kerrigan one last time, and with that I somehow managed to finish all in on my first attempt. So yes, you can beat Wings of Liberty with a DDR pad. And if you like this game, I would actually recommend you try this. It was pretty fun, and it's certainly a unique way to play through the game. And it wasn't even that hard. Sure, there were a few moments, but by and large, most of it felt like playing normally. But that was probably because I played on normal. Which leads to the question, is this possible on hard or brutal? Well, I can give brutal an outright no. I tried the first mission several times, and it's just not happening. I don't think any no-build segment will be possible with the micro expected, but I could be proven wrong. But more importantly, I don't see any macro sections happening either. The enemy attacks are a lot on brutal, so I don't think you can even survive against them, let alone actually finish any objectives. But what about hard? I haven't done any testing, but I think hard might be possible. The first problem I thought about was dealing with Kerrigan. She gets stronger on higher difficulties, so you need a better way to deal with her on hard. I think you can probably snipe her with ghosts. It'd be rough, but I think it's doable, so I think you could do all in. The biggest problem I can think of is that the enemy gets access to Storm and Seeker missile on hard, so you'd have to find a way to deal with that. But if you could play the game on fast instead of faster, so I think that should make everything else possible. Well, anyway, thanks for watching.